Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement. Well, with tomorrow being the 2022 midterm elections, I wasn't surprised to learn that it was just yesterday when an online news source known as ProPublica, they posted an article that insisted that the government has done too little to prevent Christians from violating the Johnson Amendment. Now, just to be clear, the Johnson Amendment is this controversial tax provision that LBJ created back in 1954, and this amendment was added to the Internal Revenue Code 501c3, and it's a condition that the federal government has used to stop tax-exempt churches and charitable organizations from participating or intervening in any political campaign on behalf of any candidate for public office. Well, according to this article in ProPublica, which I'll point out is also listed as a 501c3 nonprofit organization, this article points out that the Biden administration isn't doing enough to crack down on all of the churches who are allegedly breaking the law by endorsing political candidates. And according to the author of this article, they recently found that 20 churches have violated federal law by endorsing political candidates, from the pulpit leading up to the midterm elections. For example, it was October 23rd when Pastor Steve Riggle at the Grace Woodlands Church just north of Houston, this pastor informed his church that Texas needs leaders like Dan Patrick because Dan Patrick has consistently stood for values that are critical to the future of this nation. And Pastor Riggle also promoted Patrick as a strong person of faith whom God has given to us to be at the very top of our state. And Dan Patrick then got up and spoke to the congregation about the spiritual implications of this election. And this is what Dan Patrick said. He says, "This is not a race between Republicans and Democrats. This is a race about darkness and light. This is a race about powers and principalities, and the devil is at full work in this country." Wow, what a statement. Well, after analyzing the recording of that church service, the authors of this ProPublica article, they appealed to a legal expert who then went on to declare, and I quote, "This is a clear endorsement of Patrick by the pastor of a church acting in his capacity as pastor in the course of ordinary church meetings. This violates the Johnson Amendment." That's right. Pastor Steve Riggle has allegedly violated the Johnson Amendment by endorsing Dan Patrick for the position of lieutenant governor here in Texas. At the same time, the authors of this article also pointed out that, there are pastors who are also promoting politicians on the left. For example, it was back in May when the pastor of Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, he praised Robert O'Rourke for donating $25,000 to the church during that time. Now, if the name Robert O'Rourke is unfamiliar to you, it'll help you to know that Robert O'Rourke is the Texas politician of Irish descent who likes to be called Beto, because cultural appropriation is fine if you're on the left. But seriously, it was last May when Pastor Frederick Douglass Haynes III, he invited Robert Beto O'Rourke to address his congregation about his run for governor here in Texas. And that's when O'Rourke, he presented the people with a 10-minute speech about the way that the faith community played a pivotal role in the passage of the Voting Rights Act. Now, it should be noted that the abolitionist Republicans were the leaders of faith who actually freed the slaves with the 13th Amendment. They guaranteed citizenship of people of color with the 14th Amendment. And then they went on to recognize the rights of blacks to vote with the 15th Amendment. And it was the majority of Democrats who opposed these three amendments tooth and nail. It's for this reason that the people of color who first voted here in America, they voted Republican. And it's also for this reason that the first black politicians here in America, they were Republicans. And by the time that Johnson passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, well, it was because the Southern Democrats were still using Jim Crow laws to violate the 15th Amendment. And with all that being the case, Beto was playing fast and loose with the facts as he appealed to Johnson's Voting Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, as the pivotal point that allowed people of color to vote. The Republicans had already secured that right for blacks back in 1870. And it was the people of faith that were pressuring Johnson to finally enforce this in those Democrat-run southern states where the leaders weren't really respecting the 15th Amendment. Now, with that being the case, I can't help but to wonder, as the people of faith were pressuring Johnson, could this be, the real reason for why Johnson passed his unconstitutional tax restriction on pastors who want to endorse politicians? Think about it. The same president who was pressured by the people of faith to enforce the 15th Amendment turned around and created the Johnson Amendment, which is entirely unconstitutional because it infringes upon the First Amendment rights of every pastor here in America. Now, with that being the case, I would remind you about the decision made by the Supreme Court back in 1803. In this decision regarding Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court, for the first time ever, declared unconstitutional a law passed by Congress and signed by the president. And that's when Chief Justice Marshall went on to declare this, and I quote, "A law repugnant to the Constitution is void." A law repugnant to the Constitution is void. In other words, any law that violates the Bill of Rights, it's void. And in my opinion, this includes the Johnson Amendment, which seeks to limit the freedom of speech of every pastor. And it's for this reason that I encourage you, go out and vote tomorrow. Go vote for political leaders who best represent biblical morality. And in this way, we can use our God-given right to vote, and in our vote, hopefully correct the course of this country by prayerfully seeking out those leaders who will submit themselves to the Lord Jesus Christ. And with this as the goal, let's go out and make our voices heard tomorrow as we continue to fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.